Okay, so like we just talked about, one thing that makes this really bad is that unfortunately what we're doing here in JavaScript is saying that we're going to recall this method every second or 1000 milliseconds. So this is really inefficient because we're basically mounting this and then unmounting it and then remounting it every second. We're not doing any dynamic rendering or anything like that because pretty much what we're doing is we're mounting an element, or so we're basically creating a React component, and then we're uncreating it, we're destroying that component and recreating it every single second. So this is pretty much the same as just writing a JavaScript method. So let's actually do it the smart way. So the way that we're going to go about doing that is let's make some changes first of all. So we don't want to be passing in the time. We don't want to be setting the interval. So I'm going to delete those two lines of code. And then I'm going to change that. So the clock should take in no arguments right now. All right, now let's go over to the clock and let's change some stuff around. So what we're going to do is talk about state here. So in order to use state, we need to be able to say what the initial state of something looks like. And then from the initial state, we're going to take that and then we're going to use the state to display whatever it is. So when we go down to line 26, we see this.props.time. So we don't want to do that anymore. So instead, we probably want to do something like this.state.something. Let's say to do for now. And then the way that we actually make state happen is we initialize it inside of our constructor. So our constructor, let's uncomment that. So again, I copied over that and then pressed command slash or control slash. So the first thing we always have to do is super props. We always have to have that. And the other thing we need to do is if we have state, we want to initialize that here. So we're going to do that by saying this.state equals, and then we initialize whatever it is inside of here. This is the only place where we actually assign a value to this.state. So let's do something like this.state, and then let's give it a date. And let's just use JavaScript to say it's a new date object. Cool. So this basically says that we have some date and we're initializing it to date. So now we take this to do that we had here. The only thing that we do is we take this.state and then the name of the key that we want. So this.state.date. And this is a date object because we initialized it as such. So we can do a dot and then whatever we wanted to have from before. So like before, we can just do toLocale time string. Cool. So this would work something like this, but then we actually have to make it do something. So right now we have this state here. Let's actually talk about how we're going to make state be useful. So one way that we can do this is basically say that whenever it mounts, we want to do something. So let's call a function component did mount. And this is a function, again, that's special to React. Component did mount is called right after the React component mounts. So as you can see, it's called immediately after the component is mounted. Setting state here will trigger re-rendering. So that's really important there. So again, setting state here triggers re-rendering. That means the UI is automatically going to update whenever we set a state inside of here. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, let's say that we want to write a note to do set the date, set the time equal to the current time. So let's figure out how we're going to do that. The only thing that we have to do is basically say date equals new date, right? So one way that we could do this is to say this.state equals, and then say date new date. And that's going to say that, hey, no matter what the time is, automatically do it. But this is a horrible way to do it. So let's delete that. The reason that this is horrible is we don't know what other things are setting state. We don't want to be keeping track of all that. And this is done asynchronously. So the way that we should do it in JavaScript is we do something like this.setState. And then the way that we set the state is now we put whatever thing that we want to change, and only the thing that we want to change, into here. So it's going to look something like this. We're going to set the new state inside of here. Now the only thing that we're missing at this point, so let's go ahead and try refreshing it and seeing if this actually loads anything. Now the only thing that we're actually missing here is that we have to call this every second. We want to make sure that this actually happens every second. So the way that we're going to do that is actually by using something called setInterval. So let me make another to-do here. To-do, call this code every second. So the way that we're going to do this is another special function in React, and that's called setInterval. So setInterval basically says that it's going to take in a function, it's going to take in a lambda function basically, and then it's going to say how often do I want to call this. So this is going to look something like this. So first it's going to, the first argument inside of here is going to be a function, and the second argument is going to be a frequency. So the way that we do a lambda function in JavaScript is we do a empty open close parentheses, then we call whatever we want to call. So in this case, I'm actually going to call this.tick, and that's a method that we're going to write. And then the frequency is going to be in milliseconds, so let's go ahead and do 1,000 here. And then the only thing that I'm going to do is basically move this code, just for the sake of a little cleanliness, into a function called tick here. And there we go. Let's go ahead and try doing that. And I'm going to clean up some of this code here. So I'm going to take out all these to-dos that we wrote. And basically it's going to look something like this. So we have super props, and then we're setting the state. So this is the initial state that we're going to have. So again, this is the initial state. And we're setting that to the current time at that moment. And then when the component mounts, we're basically saying every 1,000 milliseconds, we want to call whatever this function is. And if we look down at this function, all it's doing is setting the date again. And then here we're doing hello world, and then we're just saying what the time is inside of here. So let's go ahead and run it now. Okay, I'm currently not seeing anything. I refreshed a couple times. The reason that it's not actually calling anything is because this is inside of a function. We're calling a function called render.html, and so it's not actually running anything. So one way that we can fix this is to just call the function here. And now it should work the way we expect it to. So every second, it's actually keeping this, and it's only rendering it once, as you can see. We're not rendering it once every second. We're mounting the component once, and then once we're mounting, we're actively changing the display by using state to change what the state of this date object is. So every time we call this.tick, then it's going to re-render the state, which re-renders the entire page. So state is going to have a new object inside of date, and it's going to happen every 1,000 milliseconds here. And every time that happens, it's basically saying to the HTML that we need to send an update. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about before we move on. If you do a setInterval, it actually has a return value. So if we look at this, it's going to say that it returns a number. That's what this notation means. It means it returns a number. So that number is actually a timer ID. So the timer ID is only useful really because we can use that timer ID. Let me write that down. Returns timer ID. So that timer ID is useful because we want to basically clean up our memory leaks. So whenever we don't need that timer anymore, then we can use the timer ID to stop calling that every single interval. So let's go ahead and store this in a variable called this.timerID. And then let's do a to-do, clear the timer when we don't need it anymore. So this is just good practice so that you don't have memory leaks or anything like that. And the way that we do this is you can clear it whenever you want. So if you just want to clear it after 10 seconds, you can do that. But the way that we're going to do it is we want to keep showing the time until the application, like this component, doesn't exist anymore. So the way that components get destroyed in React is you have a method called component did unmount, which calls after you've unmounted something. And then inside of here, you have a clear interval function, which basically takes in a timer ID and then makes sure that it clears that as soon as the component is done existing. So this is just good practice, and we want to make sure that whenever we're setting an interval, we also make sure to clean it up inside of an unmount. So one more thing that I wanted to do is prove to you that React does something really magical. And the way to do this is I'm just going to show you, and you're going to see what the real beauty of this is. So let's go into this app, and let's go ahead and inspect it as usual. And then let's open up our body tag. So inside of here, we see this content tag, which is something that we've always seen before. So let's open up that div. And you see that nothing is changing inside of here. This page isn't flashing, the HTML isn't flashing or anything like that. But this element is actually updating. Now this is the beauty of React. See how there's only one line of code that's actually changing? There's only one line of HTML in all of it. Like all of these other lines aren't changing at all. And that's the true beauty of React. React has the ability to go inside, figure out what the one line of code that's different between the old version and the new version is, and then only push updates to that one line that we need to actually change. So this is the beauty of React, and that's why React can actually be so much more powerful. We're abstracting all of this away, and we're doing that at a very small cost of basically maintaining these two different variables, props and state. So on the note of props, let's go ahead and talk about props. So right now we don't have any props because, like we talked about in class, props are passed in right here. So we don't have any props, and to prove to you that we can actually use props and state, one thing that we're going to do is implement a new prop. So let's have a prop that has your name in it. So let's go ahead and pass in a prop named Suresh, or whatever you want. So it's going to say name equals Suresh inside of it there as a prop. And then basically the using props is as easy as calling this.props. So let's go ahead and say in our render function in hello world, we say hello world, my name is, and then you just put your prop name here, this.props.name. And then you can put a period there, and that's as easy as that. So basically you pass in a prop, you're looking at the prop.name, and then you're basically using that name, you're rendering it, and then we also have state, which is internally used. So that's like a private variable that the parent doesn't have access to. So as you can see, we're not passing in date here, we're only passing in name. So that means that name is a prop, whereas whatever our states are, that's private stuff that only this component knows about. So state is private again, and props are public. So these props are being passed in by the parent, and they're immutable. So I can't change this name, or at least I shouldn't be changing this name, but the state I can change whenever I want to, and the state is also being used to re-render on the fly dynamically. Whereas the props, I can't change them, so it's not going to re-render or anything because I can't change them anyway. However, if inside of here I did change this, let's say I change this to Edward, then it's actually going to re-render the entire page because it's going to recreate the entire component. So that's the main difference between props and state. Changes to props basically recreate the entire component, whereas changes to the state just mean that it's going to re-render the lines of code that it needs to re-render.